Hi, Let's Get Crafty friends. This time around, we are making coffee filter flower pens. And honestly, words cannot espresso how grateful we are that Pastor Eva demoed this awesome craft for us during our session. I took what she taught us and made this demo for you all. So let's jump right in. Let's get crafty. To make the coffee filter flower pens, I use 4 to 5 basket coffee filters, a pen, a pair of scissors, and a sharp tool, and then a piece of wire and some floral tape. There are 3 different ways that I have decorated these flowers, 2 of which need to be completed before creating the flower. To get coffee filters that look like these, I use water and food coloring. I folded my coffee filter into 8ths, although any pattern of folding would work. I then dipped the coffee filter into the water mixture, and it didn't take very much at all before the coffee filter was soaking up the water. I then let it sit for 20 minutes folded, and then I opened it up and let it dry flat until completely dry. Another simple and child-friendly option for decorating the coffee filters is to color them with children's washable markers and then spritz them until soaked with a spray bottle. These I've also just left out until they're dry. The last style of decoration we'll talk about at the end, and that's painting with watercolor paints. The process for creating the flowers is mostly the same whether the filters are decorated or not. Other than when I stack 4 to 5 filters together, if the filters are already decorated, I usually pick something fun to be on the outside. Then I fold the filters in half until the filters are in 8ths. Next, I trim the petals into a heart shape. Unfolding the layers one at a time, I cut in between the petals down to the ring in the coffee filter. This ring is much easier to see before the coffee filters are dyed or colored. So sometimes I will look at that ring on a plain coffee filter to get an idea of how far to cut down. It's important to open the coffee filters all the way to flat and make sure to cut the last set of petals. The next step is to insert the wire and attach the pen. So using my sharp tool, I poke a hole in the middle of the filters where my wire will go. I also use my sharp tool to poke a hole in the end of my pen. Then I use my fingers to make a small hook in the wire. This hook will go on the inside of the flower. Before I can put it into the flower, however, I need to make sure that it is the right length for the pen barrel. So I just snipped it off at a length shorter than the length of my pen barrel, something that I know would fit inside. Next, I put the wire through the hole that I had already punched in the coffee filters and wrapped the flowers up around that hook. I used my floral tape to wrap around that hook to create the part of the flower where the stem meets the petals. Floral tape works best when it's stretched. That's what helps it to stick to itself. Next, I take the remainder of the wire and I put it into the hole at the top of the pen. Then I tape down the pen just by holding the floral tape at an angle and twisting the pen itself. Since this pen had a grip, I knew where to stop and start going back up the pen so that the pen cap would still fit on. But on other pens, I would just stick the pen cap back on and use that as a guide. On other pens, I've wrapped the wire on the outside of the pen so the wire didn't slip out like it did on this one. but I was able to slide the wire back into the body of the pen and tape some more right there at the base of the flowers. It doesn't look like much right now because all the petals are flat and stuffed in together. However, don't worry, because the next step is fluffing out the petals. I find that fluffing out the petals is all about personal preference. I do try to figure out which direction the petals would have gone originally, looking at the base layer especially, and keeping in mind that these petals are only made out of coffee filters. So I do remember to be careful so that I don't rip the petals. To make a second style of flower, I returned to the stack and fold process that I did in the first style of flower, except in this case, I folded it down to 16. If I wanted a larger size petal, I could have folded it down to 8, and that probably would have been a little bit more manageable, but I liked the smaller petals for this particular flower. To trim the petals for this second style of flower, I cut half a heart with the center of the heart on the fold so that when I unfolded the filter, it would be a heart shape. Next, I unfolded the coffee filter stack to half size and I cut down the exact middle following the line on the coffee filter. Setting aside half the stack, I used the remainder of the stack to cut individual petals, which sometimes required additional unfolding. I knew that it was an individual petal because it had a singular bump at the top. Once the individual petals are separated, then I cut the remainder into 2 full heart stacks. Similar to the previous flower, I prepared the wire and the pen, which included folding the wire to have a shallow hook, as well as ensuring that the wire was the right length to go inside of the pen and ensured that the pen had a hole at the end that the wire could go into. Setting the pen aside for now, I took the wire and slowly wrapped the petals around the wire. This gets a little tricky, and every few petals, it's a really good idea to tape them on. Also, to mimic real life flowers, each petal that I add is slightly lower than the petal before. This style of flower always tries my patience a little more than the other style because I'm putting on the petals one by one. It's also important to remember that petals overlap, so I try not to put the petals directly next to each other, but instead put a petal over where 2 petals are coming together. Depending on the size and shape of the petal is cut, the number of petals used, the rate at which the petals descend, and the looseness or tightness of the petals when they're attached and fluffed, many different flower types can be created. So it's always fun to experiment and look at pictures of real flowers to get ideas. With this size and shape, some of the flowers that are easy to create are roses, peonies, and irises. Once I'm happy with the number of petals on the inside of the flower, then I use the double petals that look like hearts to form the next layer of petals. If I had used the 1/8 size petals instead of the 1/16 size petals, I would use this as my final outside layer size. Similar to the same technique as I used on the other pen, I then put the wire into the pen. Then I taped down the pen and back up the pen. On this pen, I put a little bit of wire on the outside of the pen, hoping that it would hold the flower in place a little bit better. However, it was also important when I did that to tape over that section of wire multiple times so that the wire would not pop out and hurt me later when I was using the pen. Since I used the 1/16 size petals, I also used 4 petal widths or 2 hearts to go around the outside of the petal. I attached this directly to the pen, which not only gave the flower a little more poof along the bottom, but also kept the flower in place on the pen a little bit better. Unlike the previous flower, this flower does not need quite as much fluffing, but a little bit of fluffing does give the flower a little bit of extra character. For the flowers I make with plain white coffee filters, I use watercolor paints at the end to decorate them. For some, I use a dry brush technique, and for others, I use a wet brush technique, and it's all about personal preference. Well, friends, I hope your flowers are brew-tiful. Thanks for joining us for Let's Get Crafty, and we'll see you again soon.